I've had the Nikon Z6 III for just over a year now, and it has been an absolutely amazing experience. As a birding YouTuber, I've captured some incredible moments on the camera over the last year, both on video as well as some awesome photos. I really think it's time to do a full review on this camera, so let's dive in. First of all, just some basic specs about the Nikon Z6 III. The Nikon Z6 III has a full-frame 24 megapixel partially stacked sensor. It features two card slots. I can show them to you right here. Two different card slots, one here and one right here. Obviously this is CF Express card slot, and here's the SD card slot. It has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth capabilities, and it also has an articulating 3.2-inch touchscreen LCD. We can take a look at that right here as well. I'll even turn it on for you. Boop, boop. Touchscreen, right? It takes these rechargeable lithium-ion batteries, which supposedly covers around 360 shots. But I'm going to be honest with you, my batteries typically last me over half the day, so I think it's a lot more than that. It also has continuous shooting at a maximum resolution of up to 20 FPS. It shoots in HEIF, JPEG, and RAW. And for recording, it can record at pretty much everything you can wish for, with a maximum of 6048 x 3404 at up to 60 FPS. Typically though, I shoot in 4K 60, sometimes 4K 120. The camera body is approximately 23.6 ounces or 1.5 pounds. So this is actually a really, really light camera. Obviously that gets a lot heavier with a wildlife lens attached to it. And just for reference, I currently shoot on the Nikkor 180 to 600 millimeter lens. This is about a little bit over 4 pounds. So combined, the kit is about a little bit over 5 pounds. It can feel a little bit heavy. But now that we got those basic specs out of the way, let's talk about the image quality on the Nikon Z6 III. I found the image quality on this camera to be absolutely phenomenal. Obviously, you're not going to get the same cropping ability as you would on a flagship camera like the Z8 or the Nikon Z9. Those have a 45.7 megapixel stacked sensor, but for how much cheaper the Z6 III is compared to those flagship cameras, I've been extremely happy with the results. In low light, the images do tend to just come out a little bit more noisy, and that includes things like cloudy days or before the sun comes fully up. But with today's denoising technology in Lightroom, as well as like those Topaz Lab denoising technology, I can almost still pull out a fantastic photo even when there's quite a bit of noise present on that photo. I've pulled out some pretty incredible pictures over the years, and even though it's only a 24.5 megapixel sensor, I'm still able to crop in pretty far. For example, here's a picture of a green-winged teal, and then here it is cropped all the way in on that green-winged teal. Again, the lighting wasn't that great that day out in the field. I was in a lot of shade, but I was able to crop in on that green-winged teal, and it just still looks like a phenomenal photo. I feel like for the price, you end up with some incredible photos, and I really haven't had any issues or complaints in that regard. Now let's move on to the autofocus features. When the camera first released, it only had an animal detection feature, but a recent firmware update gave it bird eye detection, which has been phenomenal in certain scenarios. Before, the camera used to lock on to the bird as a whole, and sometimes if the bird was bigger, it would try to find its eye. Now with the bird eye detection, I have noticed a little bit of a bump or a little bit of improvement where it does try to find that bird's eye, but for small little birds like warblers and sparrows, it does struggle to find the eye unless I'm very close up on the bird. So like I mentioned, the autofocus certainly struggles with really small birds. It also struggles in lower light when that contrast isn't as available, and especially struggles when the bird is in brambles or behind a whole bunch of branches or in a bush. Now the nice thing is I can just switch over to manual focus by turning the dial on my lens. It has that manual override feature, so once you get used to that, you really aren't missing that many shots, even if the autofocus isn't locking onto something. But if you already have a DSLR or another full frame camera, I wouldn't say that the autofocus is the best reason to switch over to something like the Nikon Z6 III. It's definitely an awesome feature to have when it works, and when it does work, it works really, really well. And I don't miss any shots on camera or on video. But if you expect it to be a superpower and just never miss, you're probably going to end up a little bit disappointed. And I think that goes for pretty much all the cameras in this price point. I personally made the jump from the Nikon P900, which is a bridge camera, and it had no subject detection autofocus capabilities with that camera. So for me, this has been an absolute dream come true over this last year. Another thing the autofocus struggles with sometimes is when birds fly against a background, because it's relying on that contrast to pick the birds out and the subject out. In Utah, every horizon has a background because of the mountains. So when birds fly against the mountains, it struggles sometimes to find the bird in that scenario. That being said, I've still ended up with some pretty awesome photos, and most of my photos tend to be in focus, as well as my videos. Next, I want to talk about the video features, and this is what makes me the most excited about this camera. Contrary to most camera reviewers on YouTube, I primarily use my camera for videoing birds, not photographing birds. This camera is absolutely incredible when it comes to video. So if you want a solid camera and your primary purpose is to video birds or video wildlife in general, the Nikon Z6iii, in my opinion, is where it's at. In fact, a big reason why I didn't make the jump to the Z8 or the Z9 was because the justification wasn't there. The video quality, there wasn't really a jump in video quality from the Z6iii to the Z8 or the Z9. Obviously the Z8 and the Z9 having bigger megapixel sensors, that's really good for photos. It doesn't have the same benefit in a video sense. So as a video first camera person, the Nikon Z6iii does an amazing job locking onto subjects and allowing me to track moving birds. Again, the autofocus will still struggle a bit when there's birds in bushes where I have to switch over to that manual override, or when birds are flying against a horizon with a mountain in the background. But again, that manual focus ring really comes into play there. And a lot of times those birds are pretty far out in the distance anyway, so I'm not gathering the best media to begin with. I also thought I was going to miss the reach of the Nikon P900 with that 2000 millimeter equivalent zoom, but the 600 millimeters have provided way better quality cropped in than the P900 ever did. There's just no comparison there between the two. Just for context, I almost shoot everything in 4K, 60p, and I've never had any issues with the camera overheating, including clips that are several minutes long. So it's just been a really awesome camera with amazing video capabilities. I also want to talk a little bit about the ergonomics and use in the field. So the camera itself, like I mentioned, it's not heavy at all. And then once attached to this wildlife lens, it's about 5 pounds. So pretty big, combo here, but it's not as heavy as some other setups that you could possibly have. The problem is that once you put like 4 hours into a trip walking around, that weight can start to weigh on you. In fact, I probably need to hit the gym a little bit more often, but I have had my arms hurt or be tired after a long session of videoing and photographing birds. I use a cotton carrier system, which sits right here on my chest, and the camera just locks in nicely, so I never feel any weight, or that much weight at least, on my shoulders. If you had a shoulder strap, maybe that would cause a little bit more pain in your shoulder area, but I definitely wouldn't wear a wildlife setup around my neck. That would just be so much weight on the back of your neck. As far as comfortability and where the buttons are placed, I honestly think this system is perfect. You have back button autofocus where your thumb sits right here. You have your on-off switch right here with your hand. You have a dial here for your shutter speed and a dial here on the back for your aperture, and really nothing feels awkward when you're filming. There's also this dial here that you can just flip with your thumb, boom, boom, and this switches you between photo mode and video mode. Everything just seems perfectly placed, in my opinion, especially with that back button autofocus. The only thing I wish that wasn't present is this locking mechanism. You can't turn this dial unless you push down and then twist. And so you can't really switch between your different profiles here without a little bit of effort. I kind of wish they didn't include that. I get why they did, because they didn't want people switching without knowing that they were switching. But there's enough customizable buttons on this camera to make easy workarounds for those things. So for example, you have these two buttons. Let's see if I can get my fingers out of the way. You have a button here and a button right here. And these two buttons, when you're holding your camera, they fit right here on these two fingers like you're playing a flute. And so you can customize those buttons to whatever feature that you want available on the camera. And that's a really good workaround for switching between different shutter speeds or going back to different modes that are just way quicker than turning this dial. All right, now I want to talk about what I love about the Nikon Z6iii. I love its video capabilities and just how easy it is to operate. It's really easy to operate out in the field once you get the hang of it, of course. I love the price point on this camera and how you can get really high quality images and videos without going totally bankrupt in the process. I also love the stabilization. That's something that I haven't talked about so far in this review. The stabilization in this camera for video is incredible. I shoot almost everything handheld, and that's pretty much unheard of. Typically, you'd want to have it on a tripod setup so you're not shaking. Your hands are obviously going to shake. You barely notice any shake with this camera. The stabilization is incredible. And then you throw on a layer of edits in post, you can't even tell that I'm just sitting there with the camera in my hands without a tripod. It's pretty incredible. In my opinion, it's one of the best I've seen on a camera at this price point on the market. And I have compared it to a few other brands out there at a similar price point camera. The other thing I love about this camera is how customizable the buttons and the menus are. You can really create the setup that you want for what you're doing. If you're a photographer, you have all the capabilities to customize this however you want. If you're a videographer, same thing. The last thing I love about this camera is how long the battery seems to last, and I'm not sure if it's because I always turn the camera off in between subjects. I know some people probably want to walk around with their cameras on the whole time. For me, the batteries last almost an entire day of shooting video, which is pretty incredible. And then you can always have a spare battery to just pop in here whenever you want. The battery life on this camera makes for a perfect day of adventures where you don't have to stress too much about all of your batteries getting drained one after the other. What do I wish was different about this camera? Of course, I wish the autofocus was a bit more refined. In comparing with a couple of other cameras, including Sony's recent release, the autofocus seems to be a bit less efficient than that. Specifically the eye tracking autofocus for birds and just like subjects in general. I think this camera does a really, really good job, and I've only compared it to that Sony new release. And when we compared the two cameras against each other, Sony's did perform better, but theirs is also newer in its release. So I don't think the difference is big enough to justify a switch out of Nikon or switch out of a system by any means, but I do wish that that was slightly better. I don't think this is a deal breaker at all. I've gotten some fantastic media and photos without ever really worrying about the autofocus not pulling through when I need it to, so it's definitely just something I'm being a little bit nitpicky about. I also wish the camera performed a little bit better in low light, but that might be due to my lens and not so much the camera body. Maybe if I had a prime lens, for example, obviously that light would be a lot more let in. But with denoise technology and everything, this camera gets the job done in those low light settings just as much as it does during the day. So who would be interested in getting the Nikon Z6iii? I think if you're looking to make the jump from a bridge camera or even want to get your first mirrorless camera, the Nikon Z6iii is perfect for you. It's a camera that you can use for years. You can get high quality results and build an awesome photo or video portfolio without totally breaking your bank account. If you're already on a full frame camera or a mirrorless camera in general, or maybe you're on a cropped sensor, this might not be a big enough jump to justify you switching compared to what you're already working with. In fact, if you're on a DSLR, I have some friends on a DSLR, Nikon DSLR specifically, the D500. If you're switching for the autofocus capabilities, you've already got so much practice with manual focus. I don't think you're going to be impressed enough to make that jump right now. The technology is always going to get better and improve. If there's other features that you like about this camera, definitely jump on this camera. But if you're just doing it for that bird detection or autofocus, I would maybe wait a little bit to make that jump. So what's my final verdict on this camera? I've been using it for a year and I absolutely love the Nikon Z6iii. I can't say enough positive things about this setup. And while I know that there are certainly things that I wish were different, like the autofocus, for example, the pros far outweigh the cons for me. The Nikon Z6iii is such a bang for your buck camera, especially on the video side of things, and I really have no complaints about the photo capabilities either. But I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What questions do you have for me? Throw them down there. I'll make sure I answer them. Do you have this camera, and do you have anything else to add that I may have missed? Let me know. Make sure you subscribe if you love birds and birding content, and check out Bright Eyed Birding Learn, my other channel, for educational bird content as well. If you'd like to support the channel, links to my merch and my membership program will be in the description below. I super appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you all next time on Bright Eyed Birding.